Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we're talking about the challenge of creating a circular economy in the built environment as key to working towards a sustainable net zero carbon emission future. Last month, a new movement was launched across infrastructure at the World Circular Economy Forum with a vision for a built environment whose purpose is, and I quote, to enable people and nature to flourish together for generations. Now, I call it a movement because it involved a range of people, organisations and businesses who came together to publish a document called Our Shared Understanding, a summary of core concepts that inform the transition to a circular economy. So, what is the circular economy in respect to the built environment? Well, according to this report, it's about enabling people and nature to live and grow within the planet's capacity to provide resources and handle waste. And I suppose that means getting the greatest possible value from the use of materials, products, assets and systems in the built environment. Value is defined by social, environmental and economic outcomes gained from that investment. The document also highlights why circularity is so important and of course sets out a number of key objectives and challenges to help the sector to finally embrace the concept. In short, it calls for collective action to first choose to make change happen, and second, for radical collaboration to accelerate the move towards circularity. Complicated stuff, and to find out a bit more and guide us through the challenges, my guest today is Mark Enzer, Strategic Advisor at Mott MacDonald and Visiting Professor at the University of Cambridge. He's been driving this movement and continues to agitate for change across the sector. Mark, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you very much.
So, Mark, I've tried to set the scene in terms of this new industry vision for a circular economy. I call it a movement. What is our shared understanding?
Well, I think movement is a really good way of describing it, because we basically have to move together, otherwise it doesn't happen. But our shared understanding, at its essence, is a summary of core concepts that will inform a transition to a circular economy. And really, we have to hold those principles in common so that we can pull in the same direction. That's the main thing. It's enabling us together to pull in the same direction towards a circular economy. And you kind of need to have a shared understanding to make that happen.
Well, there are a lot of people, a lot of organisations and businesses involved. I mean, who's leading it? And what's your role? And why are you involved?
Well, my role was really as an editor, and you probably know Melissa as well. Melissa's in our co, so together they're kind of the lead editors. And I would use that word of editor rather than author, because what we were really doing was pulling together what we heard from others. And I think that was at the essence of this, is that in order for it to be a shared understanding, it needed to involve a lot of people. And so the approach that we used was to start off by talking with people who clearly knew their stuff, kind of world experts in this space, and getting from them what they saw as being the absolute core concepts. And so we summarised those, tried to put them into some kind of order, categorised them, and then played them back. We formed a steering group, and the steering group could then see what this kind of collection of core concepts was. But then having put those core concepts together, we could take it to a wider group. And clearly by that time, it was no longer a blank sheet of paper. It was something that people could comment on. And what we found was it's much easier for people to comment on something in front of them. So basically what we did was then take it to a wider and wider group of people so that they could comment on what was on the paper in front of them.
Well, essentially at its heart is the need for the built environment to switch its thinking towards a systems approach. And you said before that 99% of our infrastructure is already built. So what does this systems approach to the built environment really involve?
Well, I think the systems approach really involves us recognising that the way we get to the outcomes we desire, so that these are national level important outcomes, better outcomes in terms of social outcomes, economic outcomes, environmental outcomes, those kind of things, actually come from the systems that we live in, our built systems and our natural systems. So basically, if we want to get the better outcomes, we need to understand those systems better and intervene more effectively. So that's kind of at the heart of it. But where it comes to the circular economy, it's kind of recognizing that those systems play a really important part in a circular economy. Effectively, you can't get to a circular economy without having a systems view.
Okay. I mean, you are, amongst other things, you're helping the World Economic Forum steer its digital twin thinking. And of course, until last year, you ran the UK's National Digital Twin Project. It's fair to say for the last few years, you've been immersed in the world of digital twins and data. I mean, how does that work overlap with this movement? I mean, clearly digitization is central.
Yes, it's really key. Really key as an enabler, though. And I think this is true for digitalization across the board, that it's not so much a thing in itself, but it enables other things which are more important. And that's equally true in this case of the circular economy. So digitalization would help us to understand what materials and products we have and where they are, and help us to manage the stocks and flows of materials. And at a broader scale, help us to understand the systems better and intervene more effectively. But as always, the digital bit is to enable us to do something else better.
Okay. Well, I'll get a bit more on the National Digital Twin a bit later on, but sticking to the circularity, I mean, this is an ambitious vision. I think we all agree that there are many initiatives championing sustainable development. I mean, why do we need this new one?
Well, like you say, it's ambitious, yes, that's definitely correct. But it's also completely necessary, because if we don't do this, then we as humanity get ourselves into more of a mess. And I think at the moment we're facing an awful lot of big system-wide challenges. And clearly climate change is one of the big ones. And that comes in a number of different forms, doesn't it? The need to achieve net zero, but also to provide climate resilience. And I would put circular economy up there with one of those really big system level challenges. And in order to address those system level challenges, we really need system level solutions. And I think that's why we have to think at this level. And they're all connected. That's one of these systems things. So actually, to achieve net zero, you really do need a circular economy, because
right.
those things are connected as well.
Well, let's delve into some of the definitions, because it does need some demystifying. I think, when you look at circularity, sustainability, resilience, I mean, what's the difference when you look at circularity and sustainability? How would you describe the difference?
I'm not sure I would go to describe the difference. I would more indicate how they're connected. And so I think that they're both part of the same picture, and so the circular economy really, at its most fundamental, is about living within our planetary means, living inside the planetary boundaries, and with that planetary boundaries framework, there's a nice little kind of slice in the middle, and if you've read Donut Economics, it describes it really well, which is the kind of the gap between where we can't exceed it, because then we're using up more than our planet's worth of resources. But if we go too far the other way, then people aren't living well. So we need to have this kind of the space in the middle, which is a kind of a safe and equitable space for humanity to exist. So that's kind of where the circular economy leads us, is to live in that space. And then sustainability, I think, again, at its heart, is just about kind of living within our means. So there's this overlap. And then clearly, when you get into the details of it, then it works out in different ways in practice.
I mean, are there some specific challenges for achieving the circular economy in the built environment? Yes,
absolutely. And I think that one of them is just what we think of ourselves in this sector, because I think what we tend to think of is just construction, whereas the built environment is more than just building things. It's also the stuff that we've built. The circular economy is a lot more than just reducing construction waste or increasing recycling. There's this whole notion about getting more out of what we've already got. And this is getting the value out of assets and systems. And so a large part of circular economy is actually about using the stuff we've already built, using it better and for longer. So that's a much bigger picture of circular economy than just reducing construction waste.
Because, I mean, there's a note in the report which leapt out of me. It says, in reality, there are limits to the circular economy in the built environment. It cannot become a completely closed loop because virgin materials will be needed and there will be some residual waste. I mean, that's quite a reality, really, isn't it?
It is a reality, and we were keen, and the people we were engaging with in editing this were keen to kind of recognise the reality of it, because there's no point in aiming for something that is completely impossible, and then being kind of utterly disappointed about not getting there. So I think this reality is recognizing that there will always be some need for using virgin materials, and there will always be some residual waste. However, what we really must do is absolutely minimize those. In other words, we need to target zero. It might be that the reality is that we can't actually get to real zero, but we've got to target zero, and we've got to kind of aim for it and aim for it hard.
Okay. The document highlights 4 key features of a circular economy. I mean, can you just give me a one sentence explanation of how you see the challenges in each case? I mean, first up, a circular economy enables better outcomes within planetary boundaries. What does that mean?
Well, it's sort of repeating that thing I was saying, which is almost like the definition of the circular economy. The better outcomes are better outcomes for people and nature. That's what we want. But it's achieving those better outcomes without exceeding our planetary boundaries. So it kind of sounds almost obvious, doesn't it? Like, of course we have to do that. It's just that at the moment we're not. And therefore it has to be said.
Okay. The second one is a circular economy requires change to whole systems. How do you see that challenge for this built environment sector?
Yes, this is a really big one, because while we kind of recognise that circular economy is clearly the right thing to do, and I think people just kind of recognise in their bones that it's obviously right. The thing is, you can't do it in isolation or in silos. It's got to be joined up. And that means that actually you've got to change whole systems, and it's a whole systems change, because you can't, for example, have one part of the supply chain trying to be circular if the rest of the supply chain isn't, because then it doesn't work. It has genuinely got to be joined up.
Well, the whole sector is very keen on silos, as we know. It's a big thing to get into systems thinking. A circular economy, the third one, it demands radical rethinking of our economic model. That sounds quite a big challenge.
That is a big one, isn't it? And I think that this is kind of a natural follow-on from the other things we've said, because it does seem that the current economic model that we follow kind of incentivizes us to break the planetary boundaries. That's kind of what it's based on. What it means is that there's certain types of growth that end up using an awful lot of resource and end up help making us break through the planetary boundaries. There's other types of growth that don't do that. And so we got to get a bit more clever and understand what kind of growth we really want.
Okay. The fourth one is a circular economy needs active choice and collective action for transformation. How do you see that happening?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is to kind of point out that it does need transformation, because we are talking about a transformed state. Because we're not living in a circular economy at the moment, if we just assume that we want to get there, it means that there has to be change, and it's a transformatory change. So transformation is necessary, but the only way we can get there is if we collectively choose to do that and work together, because as I explained before, you can't do it in silos. We literally got to pull together to make this happen, and that's why it has to be both an active choice and a collective action.
Okay. Let's talk a bit about you, Mark. You've been at Mott MacDonald for 35 years. And until last year, you were running the Digital Framework Task Force, really driving forward with the National Digital Twin Project. I mean, clearly you've now got you've always had many plates spinning. What's your main professional focus today?
Well, I'm called a strategic advisor. And what that means, I think, is that I'm involved in lots of little bits here and there. Trying to sprinkle helpful strategic advice that will benefit people and help to move us on. And what's quite interesting to me is how that does mean doing lots of little bits in different places rather than doing one big focus thing. And I guess that was a kind of a privilege and a pleasure working on the National Digital Twin Programme, was to have a big focus on my plate. And now it's different from that, which is really interesting. Has the potential to spread the advice wider, but maybe also shallower.
So is the National Digital Twin Project, is that dead now?
No, very far from it. No, there's loads of stuff going on in the digital twin space.
But the National Digital Twin space? Yes.
So shall I run through some of the bits of that? Because I think it is really quite an interesting picture. And when you add it up, it's a very good picture. So the National Digital Twin Programme itself has moved across and is being run by the Department for Business and Trade. And they're doing some very interesting work on the Isle of Wight, a demonstrator there, which I think many people will be interested in and will have heard about. But there's more happening as well. And so, for example, the Digital Twin Hub, which is now based at the Connected Places Catapult, they had a Digital Twin Summit the other week, which was absolutely marvellous. There was 1,250 registrants for it. This is a thriving, vibrant community, largely of people in industry. And there are some fantastic offerings around industry. We kind of always knew that would be the case, that individual digital twins, that market will just take off. And that the challenge is kind of getting digital twins to talk to each other. It's the ecosystem, which is where it needs the focus. And then there's some amazing work happening in the Alan Turing Institute, and that's focused much more on the research and the academic side. And that's not all, because there's something called the Apollo Protocol, which is helping to develop connections between built environment and manufacturing. So what I'm describing here really is a number of really interesting areas where the state of the art of digital twinning and connected digital twinning is moving forwards. And I think when you add all of that up, the story is really good.
Okay. I mean, in your career, you've done many things, but the first 20 years were spent very water focused. I mean, do you miss being, and forgive the phrase, so immersed in that sector?
Very good. Very good pun. So I think the water sector is a brilliant place to grow up. I actually grew up in sewage. But I think one of the things which is fantastic about that sector is how you can see the connections. I'm a process engineer by training, and that gives a real focus on outputs. What you're trying to aim for. You kind of start designing a process from the right. But what's interesting in the water sector is you can see that you're designing wastewater treatment plants don't just happen in isolation, because there's a sewer network that feeds it, and actually upstream of that there's a water network, and the water network is kind of connected into water resources which are shared between lots of different water treatment works, and you start to see that all of this stuff is connected. So the picture which I'm trying to paint here is that the water sector is a really good place to start a systems journey on. Now, what I would really love to see is for us to genuinely get more out of our system of systems.
And you're now a visiting professor at Cambridge. Is that what that is all about then? Trying to drive that system thinking in there?
Yes, that's certainly part of it. I mean, the visiting professorship is as a visiting professor in the digitalization of the built environment, which is a bit of a mouthful. That's kind of what it's focused on, is seeing how we can use data and digital approaches to unlock value in the built environment.
There's a lot of stuff going on in your world, Mark. I mean, what do you do when you're not strategizing around infrastructure then? How do you switch off from all this?
Well, I'm not sure I should give away too much of this. I'm a keen squash player, but I'm not a good squash player. So I run around a squash court in a very enthusiastic way, chasing a little black ball. So I find a lot of relaxation in that. So I think that's probably quite a long way from systems thinking, isn't it?
It sounds an awful long way. Yeah, good luck with that. I must say, it's quite a tiring sport, as I remember.
It is if you do the running.
Let's talk a bit more about the wider picture. I mean, the work talks about three outcomes from embracing a circular economy and highlights that the built environment is inextricably linked with the natural environment, as of course are people and nature. Let's talk about each of those in turn. I mean, it says maximise value through use. What has to happen?
Yeah, this was a really interesting part of it, actually, because when we started the journey and talked with people who were experts in the circular economy, but not necessarily the built environment, they talked about the circular economy in terms of maximising the value of use of materials and products, and that makes a lot of sense. But then when you speak to people in the built environment and see this system of systems that we've talked about, it becomes obvious that there's more than just materials and products, that you can get value out of assets and systems as well. And so one of the things which we found by bringing the circular economy community and the built environment community together is actually that what we should be doing is maximizing the value of use of materials and products and assets and systems. So it ends up with a much bigger picture. And I think that there's something very neat in that, because when you look at what the value is, if you're trying to get value out of use, the real value of use comes from us using the systems.
Okay. Second one is it says work with nature. I mean, what's stopping this from happening now?
I think to a certain extent, we try to work with nature, don't we? But I think it is possible to do more of it and to do it more intentionally. And part of this is seeing that nature isn't just a source of materials, but that there is a view that nature is there to be exploited, and so we can dig some materials out of it, use it once, and then when we're done with it, we can throw it away. And when we throw it away, we throw it back into nature, and that's really not a great way of living. That's a kind of a linear economy. But nature is more than just a source of materials. It's a provider of absolutely essential services. And then also we can see that the built environment can actually be a source of materials as well as a provider of services. So it's kind of seeing the built environment and the natural environment together.
Which I suppose leads to the third outcome, which is a focus on people and nature. I mean, what has to change there then?
Yes, that's exactly right as well. And I think it's really good to kind of see people in the context of nature. Some people have to point out that people are part of nature. It's not like we're completely separate. And so I think we recognise the value that we as people get from nature. It's not just a case of us living in isolation. And interestingly, I think a lot of that came out of COVID, didn't it? In those kind of early months of COVID, you remember when all the birds started singing and people really noticed that nature was an important part of our well-being. That sense doesn't go away just because COVID is behind us. There's this massive link between people and nature and well-being. And so I think that when we think about well-being, we shouldn't just think about nature being a provider of well-being to people. It's also quite useful for us to see that nature's well-being is also the point.
Okay. We've spoken a bit about quite a lot about system thinking. And I mean, the report says that you should be combining systems thinking and design thinking. I mean, how do we do that? What's the best way to design systems thinking and design thinking?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because in some ways you kind of think that they go together so well that it might not even need to be said that you need to combine system thinking and design thinking. But the brilliant thing about design thinking, I think, is about getting the most out of materials and products and being really thoughtful about it. It means really understanding users' needs. And so that when we do design buildings and infrastructure, they're designed and managed to deliver the highest value. So, all of that comes out of design thinking. But then we can also design in circularity, design things so that it's easier to recycle rather than designing it to be hard to recycle. All of that is design thinking. But I think that it becomes so much more powerful if it's in the context of the system and where we can see how things fit together. Because sometimes design thinking can be a little bit reductionist. It kind of turns this idea into your pieces that you deliver in their individuality. I think systems thinking turns it the other way around, and you see how bits fit together in a bigger system and how they relate to each other. So combining systems thinking and design thinking is sort of a match made in heaven. It's something that really needs to happen.
So you've got all these people together for this movement. You've got some really, really challenging and ambitious targets and challenges and visions there. What happens next for our shared understanding?
Well, I think one of the key things is for us to kind of recognise the call to action, because we keep on being reminded about how urgent this is. Which therefore means we can't just carry on as we have been before and think that we're somehow going to get to a different answer. And so I think just recognizing this call to action, that actually we do need to make a circular economy mainstream. It's no longer optional. This is something that we actually have to do. So let's get our heads around it collectively and intentionally and actively, energetically make it mainstream. So that means it's a collective call to action. So I'd say first thing is recognize the call to action. But then there's also the stuff about turning it into action that is meaningful. And there's all sorts of really good ways of doing that. At the moment, we're going through in the UK the kind of national needs assessment. It's going to be coming out later on this year. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have the circular economy built into that, so that we know that we're starting to make really big strides towards a circular economy? So I think that there are specific things we can do, as well as the more generic things. There's
some huge opportunities in all of that, Mark, and some huge challenges as well. But you're there driving forward. There's a whole lot of people behind. If you look at the front of the report, the number of people and the scale of organisations involved is very, very impressive. So hopefully this will be the start of something that causes that change. I mean, how do we measure success?
Well, again, I think it's quite interesting that one of the things which we need to do is get some better metrics of the circular economy, so that we know what our baseline is and know that we're making progress. At the moment, the metrics aren't in place. There are some really good examples out there. And so, if you look at the GAP report and you're going to measure the circularity of economies, you can see that there's the beginnings of metrics which will be competent, but we've got to adopt them more broadly. So I think when you ask the question, how will we know if we're making progress? Well, one of the things is we need to put in place the metrics that will tell us exactly the answer to your question.
Sounds like there's scope for another report in there and another bit of research there, Mark. So I wish you luck with that. A great point to end on, though. A hugely challenging subject, and thanks for explaining it so clearly and for joining me today on the Infrastructure Podcast, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Well, great. Thanks, Mark. That's all we've got time for today. But we have more from the Infrastructure Podcast in the pipeline and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website. That's www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you will find background links to some of the issues discussed today. Certainly, this report we've been talking about today will be up there. And all the latest podcasts are there also for you to listen to and to share with colleagues. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Mark, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.